This podcast features criminologists discussing sensitive themes and topics. Listener discretion is advised. A 16-year-old girl leaves her home mysteriously in the middle of the night, never to return home again. This is the Lashaya Stine story. Hi, Amy.
Hey, Meghan. How's it going?
It's going. So I know you haven't heard of this case because it is one that I hadn't heard of either. And that's part of the problem here, which we'll highlight.
Is it a recent case?
Depends on what you think of recent.
Okay.
Yes, I would say anything, anything within the last 5, 6, 7 years is somewhat recent. But this is one that one of our listeners asked us to look into. He wrote in saying that he isn't actually a regular listener, but listen to this. One of his customers told him about our podcast, and specifically that we cover cases of women who've gone missing and maybe not received a lot of media attention on the national level. And so suggesting to him that he reach out to us because we might consider this case.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah, which is a compliment as well, that people recognize that we try to do that when we can. So I took a look, as usual, and I saw that there was limited information on this missing young woman. So I thought we should definitely help spread the word and try to get more attention on this case. Now, I did see, Amy, that locally there was media attention, but it's national is the problem. Local can only do so much. Sometimes you need a lot more attention across the country and different geographic areas to help solve these cases. When I was researching this case, though, I found that a number of, this made me happy, I found that a number of our fellow podcasters had covered it, like Stephen Pacheco on Trace Evidence. He covered the case very thoroughly about 4 years ago. The Vanish podcast had Lashaya's case as well, and so did Black Girl Gone. And I believe there were a couple others well, so she is getting attention in the podcast community, which does please me. But I think now we need to get other mainstream outlets involved here. And so I'd like to thank the concerned community member who wrote to us. We sincerely hope that we can help Lashaya's family in any way possible. And we hope that everyone who listens will also spread the word about Lashaya's case. So what we'll do is we'll also provide contact information at the end of the episode. Now let's meet the subject of today's episode, Lashaya Stine. Lashaya Nay Stine was born on February 8th, 2000 to mother Sabrina Jones. She lived with her mother and her siblings. Get this, Lashaya is the only girl with 5 brothers. Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yes. 5 brothers is a lot.
Yeah.
And they lived in Aurora, Colorado, where she grew up. Now, Aurora, Colorado is the 3rd largest city in Colorado, and it's part of the greater Denver, Aurora, Lakewood metropolitan area. With a population of over about 360,000 people, Aurora spans a few counties as well, so it's pretty large. And just 30 minutes from near neighbor Denver, Aurora is more of Denver's suburb, even though it's a large city in its own right.
Isn't Aurora where that theater shooting occurred, also that mass shooting?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So, Aurora is a little bit smaller than Denver, further from the mountains, and I would say more dependent on traveling cars rather than travel by public transportation. It also has many of its own industries and attractions. Aurora is certainly great for outdoors people and those interested in exploring restaurants, and it has a very diverse population. And while it's a city known for innovation in medical research as well, which I think is cool, Aurora suffers from high crime areas just as other major cities do as well. Overall, though, Aurora was a place where Lashaya and her family were happy, and Lashaya had thrived. Lashaya was just 16 years old at the time of the events we discussed today. But let me tell you something. She really had it together for her age. She was quite mature. First of all, her mother, Sabrina, said that Lashaya was always a good child, the type who never gave her any problems. They were close, so she never really worried too much. Would your mother say the same thing about you, Amy?
Oh, I don't think so. Oh, actually, no, probably not. No.
My mom would.
Of course.
I was good for a while. But Lashaya had life goals at just 16, and she was already on her way to achieving them. Well on her way, in fact. So Lashaya went to George Washington High School, where she was an honor student. Her dream was to become a nurse when she graduated, and she had already begun to apply to colleges and reportedly received a scholarship from one as well, though I don't know the full details of this. But remember, she was quite young. So at 16, I think this is really responsible and forward thinking.
Yeah.
And not just that, but she had also just earned an internship position at the University of Colorado Hospital near her house.
Good for her. I was certainly not doing that at 16.
No, I wouldn't have even crossed my mind to. So I would say that Lashaya is an impressive young woman. In addition to all of her scholarly activities, Lashaya also worked to save money for school. So she's incredibly responsible. And she was a wonderful older sibling to the younger ones, helping her mother with the children in the home. Overall, she just sounds like a wonderful young woman. Now let's discuss the evening of July 15th, 2016. It was an ordinary evening at home, though everyone was reportedly up very late. Remember, there's a lot of people in the house too. Now, Lashaya had a job interview the next day at a local restaurant early in the afternoon, I believe around 1 p.m., maybe a little bit before that. And her mother, Sabrina, was scheduled to drive her there. So she clearly needed to get her sleep that evening or that morning, if you will. But let's also remember that it's summertime and perhaps one of those late summer nights that every kid wants, like staying up late, movies, you know what I mean? It's a great night outside. Whatever the case, it appears that two of her younger brothers were still awake around 2 a.m. So Lashaya went to their rooms to tell them it was time for sleep. So she shut their doors and prompted them to go to bed. At that point, it would seem that everyone in the house had gone to bed for the evening. But in the morning, Sabrina Jones, Lashaya's mother, would find something very different. When she sent one of her sons to wake Lashaya for breakfast and to get ready for the day, he came back to let his mother know that Lashaya was not in her bedroom. So Sabrina and her children searched the house, but there was no sign of Lashaya anywhere. However, Sabrina did find some alarming clues in the house. First was the fact that Lashaya was gone and her phone was also missing.
I mean, that seems simple then, right? Just do Find My Phone or GPS on it?
I don't know if they had Find My Phone, actually. I don't know if they had the tracker at that point. But even more importantly, her phone's gone and she's gone. It's early in the morning, but her wallet, her money, her charger, and her like everyday possessions, they were there. They were in the house.
So that leads me to think maybe she was running out really quick. If I was going to run somewhere really quick, I'd probably just take my phone and nothing else.
Right, correct. I think what was also alarming, though, there was an open window with a flower pot outside of it moved to the side. So it appeared like maybe Lashaya stepped out the window as an exit, pushing the flower pot aside. Although I just want to say that I read conflicting accounts of where this window was located. Some reports said it was in her bedroom downstairs. Some said it was upstairs. So I couldn't tell you exactly the location in the house.
Okay, so it sounds like a teenager who maybe snuck out?
Correct. That's what it sounds like. When her mother realized this, she went out searching on her own for Lashaya, driving around the places where she knew Lashaya frequented in the neighborhood, but it was to no avail. She called Lashaya's phone several times. I don't, again, think that they had the tracker on it, and Sabrina's messages were going to Lashaya's voicemail. Eventually, instead of ringing, they went straight to voicemail. Without a location tracker, as I said, and with no other leads, a terrified Sabrina Jones called the police later that morning. Unfortunately for Sabrina, but not necessarily surprising to us, her phone call to the police about her missing daughter was not given top priority.
Usually is not. Let me guess. They said she's probably out with friends.
Right. So first of all, she called in the morning to report Lashaya missing. And, the police said the same thing. Oh, she either ran away or she's out, she'll come back. They reluctantly took a missing persons report over the phone. So they take the report, which did not comfort Sabrina, but it was all she could do at this time. And the police said that they would send someone over to the house to investigate. And so Sabrina waited. But the police didn't arrive until 6 p.m.
What?
Now, I don't know exactly what time she called, but it was the morning. So even if you assume at the latest that's 11:59 a.m., we're talking about 6 hours that had transpired.
Even if it was at 5 o'clock, that's too long.
That's my point. We don't know where Lashaya is, and we cannot stress how critical this time is in a missing persons case, particularly for those who might succumb or become victims of murder. The first 72 hours are extremely vital, but really, probably most people in law enforcement will tell you it's the first 48. And Amy, while most abducted children are not taken by strangers and will be found, those who are taken by strangers, as we know, sadly, are usually murdered within hours. So timing
is everything.
I mean, in no other crime is probably timing as critical as a child abduction. And unfortunately, when the police came to the house and observed the scene, the evidence for them only further reinforced that Lashaya ran away on her own. Because they saw the flower pot, they saw her stuff was there, but her phone was gone. And so they now believe that they were totally correct in their assumption. Now, unfortunately, Amy, the fact that their visit to the house only reinforced this idea that she must have run away or she's out with her friends is the most critical mistake that was made in this case, I would say.
Meghan, what made them assume that? Just because nothing was missing but her phone?
Correct. Yeah, they just said she must have left with her phone. I think it's a big mistake. Even if she did leave with her phone, it doesn't mean that nothing's wrong and she's not missing.
And I'm assuming they also think that she snuck out of her window, which provides proof that she was just a teenager who's sneaking out.
Exactly.
Such a problem.
Now, because they make this assumption, this case sits for 1 week with no investigation.
What?
Absolutely. 1 week, which means that the chances of finding Lashaya are so drastically reduced.
I'm assuming her family was trying to do something during this time.
Oh, her family the entire time was. But so let me tell you why also. The police chief of Aurora Police Department, Chief Metz, was on vacation during that week. And it wasn't until he returned to work the following week that this case made it to his desk.
What? No one was covering for him?
Right. Well, let me just say, even if a chief is on vacation, if there's a critical case, they have to be informed, no matter what. But the officers didn't deem this critical, so no one told the chief.
Wow.
Now, I know, a week, okay? However, when he returned, I don't know if it was pressure from Lashaya's family, the community, or just his own common sense, but Chief Metz didn't think this was any kind of routine runaway case, and he jumped into action quickly. He made contact with Lashaya's mother, Sabrina Jones, to get all of the information again directly from her and to see if there was any details he was missing. And then he sprung into action, interviewing people who knew Lashaya and looking at all the local surveillance cameras. So this is 2016, so surveillance cameras are pretty much in full swing at the time. And, had the officers done this sooner, they might have found what Chief Metz did, because he did, in fact, find an image or a video, a brief one, of Lashaya on a local outdoor camera, which would become an important clue.
How far from the house?
Not far. The surveillance camera showed Lashaya walking down the street and crossing at an intersection not far from her home. This was at Peoria Street and Montview Boulevard at 2:23 a.m. So this would have been just after she put her brothers to bed. And she was clearly on foot, just wearing the clothes that she was wearing that day. She didn't have a backpack or anything else with her. This was a surprise to Sabrina and the family when they found out there was a video, and especially since they could have found this video much sooner. For those who are interested, I would take a look. Unfortunately, it doesn't give many clues, but that's why I also gave the time and the streets, because you never know what could spark a memory if someone takes a look at this video. And unfortunately, this is the last known footage of Lashaya to date. And before Chief Metz took over, Sabrina was mostly on her own. I mean, her family and friends were helping, but she did get a little bit of help from an outside organization, and I believe it's one that you will know. It's one that I know well, and that is the Polyclass Foundation.
Yep, they're pretty well known. I'm assuming Sabrina found them when she was doing research on what she could do.
I believe that the Polyclass Foundation actually found her.
Oh.
So very briefly, before we get into it, for people who don't know, the foundation is named after Polly Klaas and was founded in 1993 after Polly's tragic murder. Polly Klaas was 12 years old at the time, residing with her mother in Petaluma, California, when she was abducted, sexually assaulted, and unfortunately murdered. Polly was taken from her home during a sleepover with her friends by Richard Allen Davis, a violent repeat offender who had been paroled early after abducting another young female. He tied her friends up and took Polly, unfortunately, promising to bring her back, but that promise was an empty one. And unfortunately for Polly's family and Polly, she would never return home again. Now, the class family and the community mobilized then to pass legislation that would incapacitate repeat offenders. So they were instrumental in lobbying for 3 strikes legislation, which was passed in California and many other states. And while a good body of research shows that 3 strikes have not necessarily deterred violent offenders like Davis, the significant criticism is that they're not always used against serious violent offenders like Davis, for which they were intended. But I will say this, the discussion for 3 strikes laws is definitely for another episode. Because after Polly's body was found and Davis was apprehended, her family also became advocates for missing children, starting several organizations and helping other families whose children were taken. So the Polly Klaas Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families find their missing children. And they do this in a number of ways. They provide rapid response volunteers to families whose children have gone missing. They print and distribute flyers for missing children across the country when people don't have access, resources, or time to do so. They provide free internet safety materials for families with children and other forms of safety literature. So they really focus on opening dialogue between kids and their parents about internet usage and not alienating them from each other. Locally, they also provide in-school workshops for child social media safety for children in middle schools, so right about that vulnerable age. And they work on legislation to help protect other people, aiding with the passage of Amber Alerts. And we know that Amber Alerts are the alerts that go out for missing children right away to try to spread the message before children are too far away that something can be done. In Lashaya's case, the Polly Klaas Foundation quickly mobilized to make and distribute flyers of Lashaya for her and her family around her area and around the country.
How did they hear about the case? Are they local to that area?
Well, they're located in California. There was, as I said, local media coverage about the case, and there was, some other media coverage right away.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I would imagine they also monitor missing cases. They also, by the way, the Polly Klaas Foundation also has details of Lashaya's case and downloadable flyers for anyone who's interested posted on their website to date, as well as contact information for anyone who has information about the disappearance, which we will post at the end of this episode. Back to the investigation. While nobody knew why Lashaya had left the home, and with her phone still missing, this investigation was quite the challenge. However, tips came in pretty quickly to the Aurora Police Department. These tipsters, several of them, alleged sightings of Lashaya in an area of town known for human trafficking, and in particular, sex trafficking. This area is along Colfax Avenue, and there were multiple reports that Lashaya was seen with an unknown male assumed to be her abductor or trafficker. The police took these reports seriously and followed up, especially when one tipster called in reporting that she had seen Lashaya at a specific location at a motel on Colfax Avenue, and she said, "Look, you better come because she's here now."
Wow.
So the tip was big. The police mobilized, and they got there very quickly. But unfortunately, it still wasn't quick enough to determine if, in fact, it was Lashaya in the room. What the police found was that it looked like the room had been abandoned pretty quickly, but they found a bag of female clothing that could have been Lashaya's, or it could have been another female's.
There were no cameras at that hotel?
Unfortunately, no. This wasn't the type of camera place. So was it possible, though, that this was Lashaya and that she was being trafficked so close to home because this was very local to her? These weren't the only contacts from people who claimed to know where Lashaya was. Lashaya's mother, Sabrina, received a phone call from a woman who claimed that someone her boyfriend knew from a gang was trafficking Lashaya, but she couldn't reveal who out of fear, and I think she just wanted the mother to know that her child was still alive. And while this was incredibly frustrating for Sabrina and her family, it gave them hope that Lashaya was, in fact, alive and out there. Sabrina received another call from a 23-year-old woman involved in one way or the other in sex work who told her that Lashaya owed her $2,000, but if Sabrina paid it, she would deliver Lashaya to her instead of forcing Lashaya to work off this money.
This reminds me of the Amy Lynn Bradley case.
Yeah, I have another case as well. This reminds me of Prisma Reyes.
Yeah, people come forward and try to extort money from people who are experiencing the worst thing in their life. It's awful.
Isn't this terrible? I mean, the text exchange is a sad one, with this cold-hearted woman telling a pleading Sabrina that she's sick of hearing Lashaya cry. She should just pay the money and so her daughter can stop bugging her. And unfortunately, as you pointed out, it was a scam. The woman was subsequently arrested for attempting to extort other families as well with missing children, one of whom was found deceased under suspicious circumstances, but had no relation to the extortionist. She was just a scammer and a con artist. This also reminded me of Joran van der Sloot's vile attempts to extort money from Natalie Holloway's mother, Beth. In that case, actually, the extortion of Beth was pretty much the nail in his own coffin, bringing with it federal charges in the United States and strong leverage for Beth Holloway to finally get the truth, or some version of the truth, about Natalie's disappearance and death from Joran. In Lashaya's case, it was simply false hope and cruelty that also prompted 2 more calls to her mother similar to this one. So this woman is getting multiple calls about her missing daughter. Sadly, none of these trace back to Lashaya, and her whereabouts remained unknown as her case went cold for some years. Now, while Chief Metz held multiple press conferences throughout the years urging people to come forward and keeping the publicity around Lashaya's case going, he ultimately retired in 2019 with the big regret, he said, that he could not bring Lashaya home to her family. Lashaya's family has continued to hold public events to keep her story and interest in her case in the public eye as much as possible. They have also regularly spoken to the press. It seems that they welcome press events. Her mother, Sabrina, especially, but also her aunt and some of Lashaya's older brothers. They're still completely desperate to find out where Lashaya is. The case ran cold for about 4 years, but then in 2020, seemingly out of nowhere, it seemed like the police may have had a lead, or at least some information. They conducted a search of a home on Lansing Street in Aurora, which is very close to where Lashaya was seen on that video.
All right, Meghan, this begs the question, why this particular house?
It's a great question. Very little has been publicized at all, but what I can tell you is that the police said they received a tip that they should look into the specific house, which had been previously rented by a family that Lashaya knew, or knew some members of the family. So it was a tipster. That's all that's been made public, though, other than the fact that police waited for those renters to leave the residence for good, and before a new set of people moved in to conduct the search.
Why?
And I think they actually had the cooperation of the owners of the house as well.
Why would they wait? When you have a missing person, I don't think you should be waiting to do anything in the investigation.
Sorry, I said wait, but I'm not sure. It might have actually coincided when they got the tip with the renters leaving.
Okay.
So maybe, and even if they waited, maybe it was very short time.
Okay.
I don't believe the tip involved Lashaya being held alive, unfortunately.
Okay.
But again, not everything was publicized, so I don't know all the information here. I can tell you that the search was televised, and over the course of 3 days, the police brought in lots of heavy equipment and cadaver dogs to go over the house and the outside areas, which it seemed they did very thoroughly. In the end, they did not find Lashaya, and while there was no big reveal, the police told the press that they had found some evidence in the case. Now, I don't know if they were posturing. They could have been posturing to try to shake some information loose, try to scare someone, motivate a little bit of fear, or if they actually did find some evidence that just wasn't enough to solidify a case. Either way, no further information has been given, and there are no further updates that I could find in Lashaya's case here.
That was the last update. You said 2020?
That's correct. So 4 years ago. Lashaya's case remains open and unsolved to date, making it such a priority, again, for more media coverage. Had you heard of this case?
No.
Right? Neither had I. For now, I'd like to discuss the possibilities of what happened to Lashaya, what has happened. Other than the huge mistake made by officers at the beginning of this case in assuming that this was a runaway situation, this idea has never been suggested again. And I am glad to hear that. I don't want to spend time debunking this scenario or arguing about the fact that she didn't voluntarily run away and start her new life again with no personal belongings on her.
I would agree with that. I think that's the most unlikely scenario.
Right. So let's move on to the two that I see as more realistic. First is that Lashaya was abducted and forced into sex trafficking. After many sightings in Aurora, Colorado were called in, there was speculation that Lashaya was moved out of state, that they were getting too close to her and her abductor, or her trafficker. There were new tips of sightings that came in over the border of Colorado in the state of Kansas as well, furthering the notion that Lashaya had been trafficked out of state.
Now, if that theory holds true, and I don't know if you're going to get to this or not, do you assume that she left for one particular reason and then was picked up by a stranger, or that she knew somebody who maybe was posing as someone that they weren't?
The thought is that Lashaya left because she was lured by an online predator who she believed she was meeting. She had established a relationship with this person, and then she was abducted into trafficking.
I'm assuming they looked at her social media and her text messages.
But they didn't have her phone.
But can't you still, I guess back then, nowadays with the cloud, you can still get people's information even if you don't have the hardware.
They couldn't get her information. I don't know. And I guess she didn't have a computer. Maybe it was a family computer.
Gotcha.
So really all they
Okay.
had was her phone. And really they couldn't find the information that they were looking for. So the assumption was that this was an online predator.
That also reminds me of another case we covered where they just can't find the information. Michaela
was it
Bali
Michaela?
Yeah, it was Michaela. And in that case, it's almost definite that she was lured by an online predator, but she was using apps that, like some of those apps that just like go into nowhere, like they just disappear, the information. So
Well, that's also the assumption that she could have been using those apps as well.
that no one would be able to track it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with all the apps, but yes, they're designed for those purposes, right?
Yeah.
To not be traceable. Unfortunately, this is probably a strong possibility that this happened. When it comes to human trafficking, the numbers are not encouraging. And though there is a lot of variation in human trafficking numbers, the best estimate, I believe, right now in the United States alone, this is as of 2023, approximately 1 million people are living in modern day slavery as the result of trafficking.
And do we know how many of those are children?
I don't know how many of them are children, but I would assume a good portion of them.
Yeah.
But the yearly estimates, just so you know, they're so disparate that I can't even report on them. They were all over the place.
Okay.
It's very hard to estimate who is being trafficked.
And also there's some definitional issues as well. Because when I was looking up this stuff for Michaela's case, the way trafficking is defined, sometimes you're comparing like apples to oranges by looking at different jurisdictions.
That's absolutely correct. One of the problems as well with trafficking. I can tell you in Colorado, between 2006 and 2022, there were 267 criminal cases involving human trafficking. And of those cases, over 10,000 counts.
Wow.
But very, very few convictions. In fact, prior to 2014, there had only ever been 2 convictions for sex trafficking.
Is that because it's so hard to prove, or what's...
Absolutely. Traffickers are very hard to identify. As you pointed out, they're even harder to prosecute for geographical and other jurisdictional reasons, as well as the fact that our understanding of human trafficking has taken so many years to evolve that we've confused or dismissed some of these cases as being, sex workers or runaways. There's so many complications with the prosecution of human trafficking.
I think a lot of times it's also... there are rings of individuals. So you have one person who's communicating with the target, and then one person who's physically picking them up, and then another person who's transporting them. So it makes it very hard to track all of these individuals.
This is organized crime at its finest, you might say, or at its worst.
Yeah.
We could spend a whole episode on trafficking, but I also want to explore the second option here, and I certainly don't mean to be the pessimist in the room, but it is also possible that Lashaya was similarly lured by an online predator who murdered her and did not traffic her. The rates of Black women and young girls who go missing is alarming. Keep in mind that Black citizens in the country represent just 13% of the population, but yet 35% of the missing. So you can see how disproportionate this is.
Yeah, this is a huge issue for so many reasons.
And though we do not know if Lashaya is missing or if she was murdered, reliable statistics also tell us that Black women, and young Black women especially, are murdered at 6 times the rate of white women in the United States. And I want to point out that Lashaya is a child, but she's also a child on the verge of being a young woman.
And what are we doing in our society to protect these vulnerable populations?
What do you think we're doing?
nothing or not enough, clearly.
Not enough. And are we even publicizing it? Where's the
That's the
education
problem.
on this? Where's the assistance? I mean, statistics aside, Amy, we have seen remarkable survival stories from some young girls and women who have been kidnapped and lived to tell. And I sincerely hope that can be Lashaya. I do think the family has reason to hope that she's still alive. So turning to what are we doing? We often talk about the system. What has happened here? Is there a failure? I mean, obviously, we can't talk about the apprehension or conviction for, Lashaya's disappearance and what happened because we simply don't know. But I am curious if there's other leads. I also was curious when they went to that motel room and they found a bag of female clothing. Did they run DNA?
I would imagine. I mean,
I don't know.
You
I don't
really
know.
think in this kind of case they would find that and just be like, oh, this might be hers. Let's move on. I would hope there has to be more diligence than that.
I would hope are 3 key words, but that doesn't tell us whether or not that's what happened. So I agree. I would hope so, but I really don't know the answer.
And it would also seem obvious that they should process that room for hairs or any other potential evidence to see who was in that room.
But I could not find if that was done or not.
Okay. Let's just hope it was, because that would be a huge miss.
It would be a very, very big miss and very disappointing if it was not done. So I hope so as well. It seemed that they were taking the case more seriously by then. And why hasn't the mainstream media picked up on this case like they did with Elizabeth Smart or Natalie Holloway? Why had we never heard of Lashaya Stine before a Good Samaritan wrote in about her case?
Well, I think we know the unfortunate answer to that. We've talked about this on several of our episodes.
So the system cannot get it right and never will until there's equal priority on missing women of every single race and background. And that's just the simple answer. It's not a simple answer. It's not a simple problem, but it's a straightforward answer. So let us say her name, just like our podcasting community has, which, again, I'm very proud to say. Let's share her name and urge others who are listening to cover the story. She has a family. They're willing to speak, and hopefully they can keep providing more information. And I would love to see them able to do so in a national arena.
And I would love to be doing an update that she has been found safely.
I would love to as well, Amy, especially in one of these cases we covered. I would really, really love to see some type of happy ending if it's possible. All right, let me give some information about Lashaya. So when Lashaya Stine went missing in 2016, she was 16 years old, 5 foot 6 inches tall, and weighed approximately 150 pounds. Lashaya has a quarter-sized round scar on her chest, and today she would be approximately 24 years old. You can check out the Poly Class Foundation website for pictures, both old and those of her age progressed as well. Anyone who has any information at all about Lashaya can call the Aurora Police Department at 303-627-3100, the Poly Class Foundation at 1-800-587-4357, or the Crime Stoppers tip line at 720-913-7867. There is currently a $15,000 reward for anyone with information that leads to Lashaya's whereabouts. Okay, that is our case for today. And again, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us, listening, and we encourage you to spread the word.
Meghan, thank you for bringing this case. I think it's important that we elevate these stories, and the more we can talk about these cases, hopefully the more that can be done in bringing some of these missing people home.
Well, we certainly hope so. And thank you again to the Good Samaritan who wrote to us. We'll see everyone next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonzo. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime. Sources for today's episode include CBS News, The Denver Post, The Charlie Project, Grunge Magazine, Trace Evidence, the podcast, Fox 31 News, the Colorado Sun, the NAACP, and the U.S. Department of Justice.